Hello and welcome to another episode of Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannan. So, what's the deal with free will? Free will. I'm sure you've heard of the concept. Uh, it essentially means that we have control over our decision making. We are free to decide how we want to decide, and that those decisions originate with us, with ourselves, and nobody can control us or control our minds. Um, it's a very important concept uh, uh, because people want to believe that they are in control of their own decision making, their own lives, um, and that they're not a slave to something else or somebody else. So, do we have free will or not? Well, it depends on how you think about it. Where does free will originate from? Well, in today's scientific age, we know that the center of decision making is our brains. And brains are composed of matter and molecules and organic structures. So our brains are a made thing. Um, Consequently, our brains are subject to the laws of physics, the laws of physics which determine how matter behaves. And those laws are, for the most part, unchanging. So, our decision making comes from our brains, which is material, and matter is subject to laws of physics, which means that our decision making is, to a large extent, deterministic. It's determined by forces such as the laws of physics. Now, the brain is extremely complicated, and in fact, nobody on Earth understands with 100% certainty how the brain even works. It's a huge medical mystery, really, how consciousness comes to be and how decisions are made in our brains. So a lot of this is very unclear and unsure at this point in time. But we can be sure that the brain is, in fact, a material organ subject to the laws of physics. That means, to the extent that the laws of physics are deterministic, so are the processes that go on inside our brains. So, to that extent, our free will is subject to the determinism of the laws of physics. Uh, the concept of radical free will uh, says that we are in control of ourselves and nobody else is. Um, we have ultimate freedom in terms of our free will and our decision making. And that is false. It's not true. We are subject to the laws of physics. Our brains are subject to the laws of physics. Um, and not only that, the idea of radical free will is illogical. Uh, Everything has a cause, except for God, because God is uncaused. But everything material, energy, matter, space-time, it's all caused. Everything has a cause. For every thing that occurs, X, there is a cause, Y. And for every cause, Y, there is an earlier cause, Z. And you can keep doing this um, backward in time to the beginning of time itself, to the Big Bang itself. So everything has a cause. So even your decision making, your free will, has a cause. And it has to have a cause. Because that's how matter and energy works. It all has a cause. So even your decision making must have a cause. Because your brain is made of matter and energy. So it's not radical free will. It must be caused. The idea that your free will is uncaused and solely the result of what you desire doesn't make any sense at all, because there's no such thing as uncaused uh, 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 personality that could make decisions besides God. We are created creatures. God is not. God is uncaused. So because we are created, then our personalities, our decision making must be caused. If we were, if our decision making, our personality was uncaused, uh, well, then where did it come from? What is this thing that we call our personality, our decision making, that's uncaused? What is that? Where does it reside? I mean, if it's uncaused, it couldn't be material, because all material things are caused. So, where would that be? Well, the answer is it can't be anywhere. Because we're caused. So the idea of radical free will is really an appeal to magic. Magic, it's an appeal to something from nothing. Because there's nowhere you can have this uncaused human personality. There's nowhere for it to exist. There's nowhere for it to be real. So that would have to be magic, something from nothing. And that makes no sense at all. So radical free will is an impossibility. There's nowhere to put it. Where do you put it? For something to be real in a material sense, it's got to be somewhere. And if there's nowhere to put it, because it's supposedly uncaused, well, then it can't be real, with the exception of God. So the whole concept of radical free will is an impossibility. It's magical. It's an appeal to magic. So what can we say about free will? Well, taking God aside for a moment, you can say free will is basically the decision-making process that you get using the human brain, which is very, very complicated and to some extent very unpredictable, but still based on the laws of physics. And the laws of physics are, at least at a level above the quantum level, very, very deterministic. In a classical Newtonian physics, it's very deterministic. We know what the laws are and how things behave, and your brain doesn't deviate from that. So that's where your free will be very deterministic. People may not be able to, accurately predict what your brain is going to decide to do. But the laws of physics, nonetheless, are deterministic, and they're determining what your decision is going to be. The brain itself is a big unknown, and whether there's any real influence on the brain's decision-making ability at the quantum level remains to be seen. I assume no, because the quantum level is so small, it doesn't probably impact our thought processes. So it's probably very deterministic. But even then, even if there was some sort of quantum effect on our thinking, that would be more probabilistic than deterministic. But there's still a guiding force of probability. Taking God aside for a moment, that's what free will really is. It's a material determination by our brains based on the laws of physics, what we're going to do, what our decision is going to be. So it is very much deterministic, but extremely complicated and difficult to predict. So that appears to be free will. Well, there is one other thing to say about free will, and that is, what about God's free will? God is an uncaused, immaterial, singular, and mysterious creator of material reality who decides what is made real and what is not made real out of the infinite possibilities that are logically possible in material reality. God is necessary for there to be anything real at all in a material sense. But God is not material. God is mysterious, but not material. And God is omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent. God is all powerful and knows everything. But the key characteristic about God is that God has this mysterious decision-making ability. God has the ability to decide what becomes real and what does not become real in a material sense, out of the infinite possibilities that are logically possible for material reality. And God is uncaused, God has the power to create material reality. So God has this decision-making ability. That's what makes God God, really. He's not just some mindless mechanism. He's got a mind, the mind of God. Now, the mind of God is mysterious, but it's also free. It's a free will. God has free will. God's free will is uncaused. Unlike our free will, which is caused because it's material. It resides in our brain, and our brain is our subject to the laws of physics. God's doesn't have a brain, but God has a mind. God is uncaused, but God is not made of matter or energy. God is extremely mysterious in that sense, but nonetheless real and necessary. So God's mind is radical free will. It doesn't have to be put anywhere because it's uncaused. It's not material. In fact, the only source of radical free will is God's mind. That's it. How specifically God decides things? It's a mystery. God is not subject to time. So God does not decide things like humans do, subject to time. Like I decided yesterday I was going to wear, brown shoes today. God is not subject to time. God doesn't make decisions like that. But nonetheless, God does make decisions. It's a mystery. But the only source of radical free will is God. God's the only one who's got radical free will. That's it. Now, because God is uncaused, God is not made of matter. He's not made of material parts. That means God's radical free will is also uncaused. Because God's radical free will is uncaused, that means there's no way to make it. You can't make it. God simply exists with radical free will. No one made God. But that also means you can't make radical free will. So even God cannot create a human being with radical free will, because radical free will cannot be made, even by God, because God cannot make that which is uncaused. It's impossible. Even for God. God cannot do things that are impossible or beyond any power or from an uncaused source or that are logically impossible. God can't make a square circle because it's impossible. It's a contradiction. It's logically impossible. There is no power that can do that. Even God's power can't do that. So God cannot give human beings radical free will. It's uncaused. He can't make it. Can't give it to you. If he can't make it and he's making you, he can't make you to have it. So what do you have instead? Well, because God is in charge of the universe, the laws of physics, because God, has his finger on everything that happens. He creates, he sustains, he destroys, he changes, and he knows everything that's going on. Then God is the one deciding what goes on in your brain. God is in charge of the laws of physics and allows them to be maintained a certain way. And God can change the laws of physics anytime he wants to. He just does it. So, in terms of giving us some semblance of free will, you need to understand that God is the one ultimately deciding what goes on in your brain. He's in charge of the laws of physics. So he's the one deciding for you what you decide. So God's the one deciding what you do. He has to be. Because God's in charge of everything. God has to be the one deciding for you. So you may say to yourself, well, if God's deciding everything I do, then I'm not really in charge, am I? And therefore, I don't really have free will. It's God who's deciding everything. I'm just a puppet on strings, And God's pulling the strings. Well, that's not exactly accurate. And the reason is this. God makes decisions, true. But God's decision making is outside of time and space. Now, that's a mystery how that's even possible. But nonetheless, true and necessary. God has to be outside time and space because God is uncaused and time and space is caused. So God can't be material. He has to be outside time and space. Time is caused. It's part of the Big Bang. God's got to be outside of time. God's got to be able to create time. You can't be subject to time if you're creating it. So God's decision-making ability is outside of time. Now, what does that mean? It's mysterious, but true nonetheless. So, if God is deciding what's going on in your brain and is deciding what you do, but those decisions, God's decision making is outside of time itself, then God's decisions appear to you to be instantaneous and not pre-planned at all. So it's not like God decided 6 months ago that today I wouldn't wear a watch. He didn't pre-plan that because God's decision making is outside of time itself. And consequently, it appears spontaneous and instantaneous and not pre-planned at all. So because of that mysterious decision making of God, your decision making, your own decision making appears quite instantaneous, not pre-planned, or could be pre-planned and then you act on it later. But it all appears to you to be, instantaneous and free will. It seems to be like free will. So our free will, which is really a simulation of God's free will, because God is the one deciding what you do or not. But because God has this mysterious free will outside of time itself, your free will appears to be very instantaneous. And it appears like a simulation of God's free will. It's like virtual free will. So, free will really does exist. It's just not radical free will, will something from nothing. What it really is God deciding, but because God has this mysterious decision-making ability outside of time itself, it appears to you to be very much your own free will, instantaneous free will. It appears as if you are deciding everything when you want to decide it, not based on any pre-planning. So, you can thank God for that free will. God has given you the best version of free will that is possible. God can't give you his radical free will because it's uncaused. Can't cause it, can't give it to you. But he can give you this, which is the next best thing. And a pretty good, great simulation of what his free will is like. So, in summary, yes, you do have free will. It's just maybe not the sort of free will you're thinking about, but you do have it, and it is very much real. And you do have responsibility for your own decision making. All right. I guess that's it for free will. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below, and maybe I'll do a future video addressing them, or maybe I'll answer your questions in the comments below. And if you would, please press the subscribe button. All right. Take care, everybody.